Should Kansas change its constitution to eliminate the right to an abortion? More and more think you should get to vote on that. Plus, an attorney general's visit to Kansas brings the discussion of a potential presidential impeachment to town with him. And did the mayor of Wichita use his office to benefit his friends? The district attorney is now investigating complaints. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. This is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. Sunday morning, the Wichita Eagle's front page headline was Mayor Steers multi-million water contract to friends. That story has now sparked complaints to the district attorney who is investigating. I spoke with the mayor and the reporter behind the story earlier this week for Cake News.
You've got serious questions about whether or not we actually are hiring the best people to build a plant that we desperately need.
The city has made it clear we need a new water treatment plant soonest. The current facility is 80 years old, and a single failure could leave 500,000 people without water.
We're going to have a water treatment facility that's going to be state-of-the-art that we're very comfortable with.
The city council gave the contract to build a new plant to Wichita Water Partners, a team of local companies, chosen over a nationally known design firm that specializes in water treatment plants, a company the city selection committee had unanimously backed. Sunday, the Wichita Eagle published the results of a months-long investigation involving thousands of emails and the mayor's schedule, showing what it says is a pattern of favoritism on the mayor's part, a series of maneuvers intended to push the $500 million contract in the direction of the mayor's friends and golf partners.
But I'm equally friends with the Jacobs team.
The mayor immediately fired back, posting a 2-page statement to social media, pointing out what he called facts the paper left out of its story. For example, he says he had friends in both camps. Though the Eagle says his friends with Wichita Water Partners were leaders on the team, while the friend that he has named with Jacobs Engineering is a subcontractor. And the mayor says he didn't exactly hand over the contract by himself.
For someone to imply that I control this council is a rather silly notion.
Political analyst Dr. Russell Arbin Fox agrees, saying the mayor is just one vote. But that doesn't leave him without power.
It has the authority to introduce matters to the city council, has the authority to break tie votes. These are the sorts of things that the Wichita Eagle documents as having allowed this.
And there is a 2008 city law saying members of the council shouldn't vote on issues that involve their friends. Should you have recused yourself in this instance?
So the reality is we could never vote if you just go on the strictest terms of friends. We build relationships, and you live in this city for as long as I have, you're going to have friends all over the place.
I wanted to know why, so that really got me kicked off.
Chance Swaim says the story behind this headline started when the mayor made a comment last July about diverting from the regular bidding process while deciding who would win the contract to build Wichita's new water treatment plant, Jacobs Engineering or Wichita Water Partners.
I figured that was probably worth a second look.
Swaim already knew the names of the key players from his coverage of the aging treatment plant and the city's efforts to replace it. He began submitting open records requests, mostly for emails and other communiques.
It's a mountain.
The result? Thousands of pages to dig through.
So when you get all of that at once, and you don't know what you're looking for exactly, but you know there's probably a story in here somewhere.
But the issue of clean water in the metro area is so important, he felt it was worth the work.
It's clear Wichita needs this project. And it's not just Wichita. And we have a military base here. We have all of our outlying communities tied into our water system.
After months of digging through the records and comparing them to the mayor's schedule, Swaim's story led to this headline that Mayor Jeff Longwell had steered the contract to Wichita Water Partners, a company that included several of his friends. The mayor told me Sunday Swaim left details out of the story, including his friendship with at least one member of the Jacobs team, and that while it's his job as mayor to lobby the other council members for what he considers the best for the city, he doesn't control their votes.
It's sad for them to do a story because it disparages the entire council. I mean, we have 7 independent council people that pride themselves on representing their city.
I feel like the amount of time, thought, question, opportunities to respond that were provided to the city, I think we did a very fair job.
And joining me on the desk this week to discuss this and more, we have State Representative Blake Carpenter, Republican from Derby. We have Dr. Neil Allen, political scientist from Wichita State University, and State Representative Jim Ward, Democrat from Wichita. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So this is a story that is, in a lot of ways, I know it's consumed newsrooms. It's getting a lot more play with the public than most newspaper headlines, most TV news stories do. And I can tell that simply by the people that are coming up to me on the street and asking about it. How big of a deal is this? We're talking city politics, but we're also talking the middle of an election that's about a month out. Blake?
Well, Professor backed me up on this one, but a lot of politics hit home right in the local. This is in their backyard. We're not talking about Washington, D.C. or anything like that. But I think I need to be very clear in this matter, because the thing is that if there was something that happened that was not above board, I think that it should be looked at and disciplined with extreme scrutiny, because this is just not something that elected officials should be doing. Now, the district attorney said that he's going to be looking into that. And so for me, I want to see all the facts and see how it plays out. Because as we've talked about, there's many times where either not all the sides of the story are all there, or needless to say, I just really want to see if all the facts are as they were stated in the paper. And so I'm reserving my judgment ultimately until I have everything in front of me and I can make a informed opinion about it. And then also, our mayor here in Wichita, he doesn't have the same amount of power that a New York City mayor or Chicago mayor has. I think we ended up catching in that earlier clip. He is more or less just one vote there on the council, and the council members kind of had to go along, they all got their own votes. So at any point in time, they could have stopped this process if they were so determined to.
Well, sure. One thing I think is important here to note is the importance of the public policy issue here. And so the Wichita water plant is a tremendously important piece of public infrastructure. I mean, like you're in Derby, you live there, and do you get water from the Wichita plant?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so lots of communities around. I mean, you might argue it's the most important bit of public infrastructure that we have. And there's been lots of reporting about difficulties about replacing it. That was before the Eagle article. So this shows you, just to plug politics, why people need to pay attention, get involved, and vote. Because frankly, the water plant in Wichita might be way more important for our lives in South Central Kansas than anything that happens in Washington, D.C. or Topeka.
No, I used to preach that all the time to my students when I was teaching.
Yeah, I'll just echo what the professor said. The most important job of the city council is to ensure the water for the South Central part. 500,000 people, 500,000 depend on the Wichita water plant that is being held together by some duct tape and chewing gum and baling wire. One mistake away from shutting water off for half a minute. And you saw the plaque that you put in your piece. Franklin Roosevelt was president, was built. It's 80 years old. And we're now, unfortunately, this dark cloud has put a light on, but really the question is, what's the council been doing for the last 10 years as the most important job of the city government for the people of this district or this town seem to have been neglected? And that's problematic. The whole issue, I'm glad, is getting the light and the attention it is getting right now.
I'm going to go back to something that you brought up, like the district attorney's investigation. The district attorney has only released a statement saying that because of a series of emails that they got raising concerns on Tuesday, they're investigating. Now, when I spoke with some council members yesterday after it came out that the investigation was starting, the point was made, the district attorney is obligated to investigate once the complaint is made. So is this a lot of smoke right now and we don't quite know what's behind the smoke? Is that kind of what we're seeing here?
I think this is something we're all talking a little bit about before the beginning of the show, which was, it was very interesting that this piece seemed to have hit just 30 days before an election. And so I think that there could be a lot of smoke. There's a lot of confusion right now. And so I'm hoping the smoke clears relatively soon so that the Wichita voters have, clear vision when they go into the voting box.
Yeah, because they do have to make a decision by November 5th.
Yep.
You never want to go into an election with this tag by your name. District Attorney investigating. No matter what happens, the mayor's worked hard, I think, the last few days to try to present his side and his positioning. But that's a problem. For whatever reason the DA is doing it, that tag is there, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, and I will say he has been very responsive to media requests, to speaking. He came out and spoke with me on Sunday. He was busy yesterday when all this came out about the district attorney's office, but he did respond to my text messages. So he has been answering questions. He hasn't been hiding from the media in this case. So, well, it's going to be, I think we're in this one for the long haul. I don't think this one's going away anytime soon. But talking of presidential impeachment, that came to Kansas this week as well, following Attorney General William Barr to town. KSN's Tiffany Lane explains why he was here and why some Kansans were upset by the AG's visit.
We are thinking about strategies and approaches to ratchet up the pressure, to try to bring more resources to the table, expand our joint task forces.
Attorney General William Barr, Senator Jerry Moran, local and state law enforcement spent about 45 minutes discussing a variety of topics, including the issue of mental health and how to help.
Mental health and the need for more mental health resources in our communities so that it's not all falling on the police.
A need for a greater focus on prevention, on treatment, particularly as it relates to drugs.
During Barr's visit, protesters gathered outside the Wichita-Sedgwick County Law Enforcement Center. One of their focuses, President Trump and the impeachment inquiry.
The fact that during the impeachment process, that he would show up here, it's an opportunity for us to speak out. We don't get a lot of Washington, D.C. people here.
Senator Moran did address the media about the impeachment inquiry.
We need a country in which we're working together, not pulled apart. And this latest conversation about impeachment is pulling us apart further.
And he spoke more than just about the divisiveness of the entire impeachment discussion. He also talked about how he believes that the president was elected and should finish out his term. Kind of some interesting points there. But it seemed to me that there was no direct, the president is right, the president is exonerated, nothing wrong happened. It almost seemed like it was, I'm being a party loyalist, he should serve out his term, I'm reserving judgment on the others. Am I reading something into that? And Neil, I'm going to go with you because I know you had some folks who were actually in the room there as well.
Sure, actually, in one of those shots you could see Kylie Cameron, editor of the Sunflower, who has taken about 5 classes from me, and is a person I often go to for information because she often knows better than I do what's going on. But, I mean, Moran has been, of Republicans in the Senate, has probably been a little less positive on Trump over time. He did vote against the emergency declaration on immigration policy and the wall at one point. But if you read his comments, he's not saying I support impeachment of the president. He's not saying I support the process. He's really doing what, frankly, most of us are doing, which is saying there's a lot of stuff coming out, and we would like to figure out what is going on. And I know a lot of people would like Moran to come out against Trump right now, but it really just isn't reasonable for a senator to come out immediately against the president of his own party, particularly whenever Senator Moran had work to do that day. I mean, he was working with Attorney General Barr on issues involving law enforcement funding and showing him the work that we were doing at Wichita State University with the new ballistics lab. And so that work has to keep going, even as we're all, as Americans, trying to figure out what is going on involving the status of the president.
Thoughts?
I had 2 takeaways from the Attorney General. First of all, when they started to ask the Attorney General questions, the media was shut down and pushed out of the room. That concerned me because we're public buildings and access, and the Attorney General is clearly a key figure, and he should have to answer questions unscripted to the media in Wichita, Kansas, as well as anywhere else. That was disturbing. I've always been disappointed with this particular Attorney General, not because of his politics, because of his view of the office. The United States Attorney General is all of our lawyers. His or her job is to enforce the laws of the United States passed by our elected representatives. He is not the personal lawyer of the president. The president has a White House counsel. The president has a personal lawyer. The president can hire as many attorneys as he needs. But the United States Attorney General is our lawyer. And he seems to have enmeshed himself so much with the president that I don't see that objectivity that I would hope to see from an Attorney General.
Like, I can tell you disagree.
So I think that there has been a consistent drumbeat since January of 2016 that we need to impeach this president, we need to get him out of office, Russia collusion, it's one thing after another, and the Democrats have consistently attacked and tried to figure out a way to remove this president from office before his term expires. And so I think that this is just another one of those deals where they're just beating on a drum. And as far as the Attorney General going after people or upholding the law, I completely agree, and we should be asking those questions of the former vice president and how his son and him were involved in the Ukraine. I think that we should also be continuing to look into the 30,000 disappeared emails that former Secretary of State had that had classified material on it, and how she had that on a private server. So I think that the Attorney General does have some stuff that he could still look into.
Well, it's not, I'm going to kind of end their conversation here, because it sounds like really what we're seeing is the same conversation going on in Kansas that is going on at a national level. We're hearing the same things that we're hearing at the national level. We're probably not going to solve that. So we're going to go back to Kansas politics now. Here in Kansas, upset lawmakers are calling for change after learning millions of your tax dollars meant for economic development were spent on other things. The Wichita Eagle reported this week an audit of the state's Economic Development Initiatives Fund showed it's become a way to supplement overall state spending instead of going to help with economic development. In fiscal year 2018, which ended last July, the audit showed the fund spent more than $42 million. Nearly half of that went into the state's general fund, used to cover other state bills. Just under $8 million actually went to programs that met the fund's requirements. Lawmakers set the fund up in 1986. The money comes from state gaming and lottery proceeds. It's supposed to go to help finance innovative Kansas companies or products, support research and development, and community infrastructure, according to the Wichita Eagle. The auditors determined not only does Kansas not follow its own rules in handing out the money in this fund, it doesn't follow recipients to see how well the money works. In fact, auditors said most agency, legislative research, and state budget officials didn't even know what the state law was in regards to this fund. Okay, so Jim, you've been in the state legislature the longest. I'm going to come to you first. How does that happen? How do we end up with lawmakers, with legislative research people, with folks who work on this committee who don't know the rules that the legislature set? How does that happen?
I can't speak to other people's mind. I knew the rules. I knew what was passed in 1986 when we expanded the lottery. And then I know what happened when we expanded it to casinos and other activities. The reason why is when you blow a hole in the budget of $1 billion, you're scrambling for money anywhere you can. And I don't think it was an accident or they didn't know what they were doing. It's because we have this massive hole because we told 330,000 people they don't pay income tax anymore. And so they moved money from the Economic Development Fund that was supposed to be targeted for economic activities into the general fund to keep afloat. Now, we're in the process of moving away from that because the revenues are now back in sync. And I think you'll see moving forward more effort to follow that or to change the rules, to say what the state of the world is different than it was in 1986 when we put those rules in effect, that we need to put them in a different or change or give more flexibility. But we should do one or the other, either follow the rules or change the rules to do things that we want to do now in 2019.
Well, not having existed in 1986, that goes a little bit prior to my time, but I think that in my mind, one of the reasons why I think you have this issue with accountability taxpayer funds. We see this, all the time in Topeka, where we'll find a fund and we're going, what are we doing with this? Well, I think there's a number of reasons. Number one is that we're only a part-time legislature. We're not there very often, and you can back me up if you would be, if you're willing to. But I think it's because we're only part-time. We're only there a few months out of the years. Other than that, we're all out living our lives. We're doing real jobs, that we have to pay our pay our bills and support our families. And so then you have interim committees that do get a chance to dive into this, but it's only a handful of legislators. And then on top of that, legislators turn over all the time. I think the average turnover of a House of Representatives member right now is like an average of 5 years. And so you don't really have much history in the elected officials, unfortunately.
So is this an argument, Neil, for a more permanent professional legislature?
Yes, and I'll go ahead and make that a little bit, just because the last thing I do is want to have one of my friends who are in the legislature make that argument. But we can pay legislators better, and we can get more staff, and we are on the low end of both those things. But also, this is the lottery money, and I'm old enough to remember when most lotteries went in, and there were clear claims made in every state about where it's going, quite often for education, and almost every state has gone in the general fund at some point. About one of the examples of the opposite is Georgia with the Hope Scholarship, but that happened basically because they had a very powerful governor that made sure nobody would touch it. But the idea of it, you're going to have a new revenue source and you're going to dedicate that to only one thing for 20, 30 years, that's not how democracy works. But more staff, a bit more pay in a legislator to get legislators to stay longer, and we could probably make some progress.
So I could tell that there was I don't like the idea of a professional legislature on the desk here too.
I would just point out that those promises that the rules came out were made to the voters. When we went to the voters in '86, I think was the year that the lottery passed, we told them that if you give us this opportunity to do this lottery, it's going to produce a certain amount of money, and we're going to do everything we can to spend it on education, economic development, and those were the two buckets that we told people we were going to do it. Now, you can make an argument by putting in a state general fund, 85% of our general fund, 65% of our general fund goes to education. So it's going to education indirectly. It's really those economic development programs, and I think we can keep the promise while still upgrading our economic development to meet the needs of 2019. Because Blake and I were both out at Wichita State and the Innovative Campus opening the Spirit Center that's a partnership between Wichita State and Spirit. Now, in 1986, we weren't thinking about economic development like that. We should have the flexibility to do that. So what the post audit said is, look, our job is green eye shade, arbitrarily looking at these words and what you spend, they don't seem to fit. But I think we did invest in the Innovative Campus, and that was a huge economic development to for our area. So we have to have, as the professor said, the flexibility to legislate democratically in 2019, which is different than 1986.
Well, and I think that ultimately, I would say my argument would not be for a full-time legislature, because then that just gives us more times to break things.
Well, there's a point there too.
Yeah.
Well, looking at other things, state lawmakers took their first steps this week toward a constitutional amendment that would allow the state to restrict or even eliminate abortion rights here in Kansas. Anti-abortion activists vowed to change the Constitution. This last week, they took the first step, convincing the legislature's Special Committee on the Judiciary it was necessary. Groups like Kansans for Life argued the Supreme Court's ruling endangers dozens of abortion restrictions already on the books in Kansas. Those laws block most abortions after the 21st week of pregnancy and require parental consent for minors to get an abortion. The committee recommended an amendment to the state's constitution specifying that there is no inherent right to an abortion. A constitutional amendment in Kansas requires a 2/3 vote of both the House and the Senate, the governor's signature or an override of her veto, and then a 2/3 approval vote from the public. In an editorial after the hearing this week, the Kansas City Star argued, "Let the public vote on the issue," quoting Wichita Republican Nick Hoheisel that, at the end of the day, it's the people's constitution. It's the people's right to decide this issue. So, public vote. Maybe it should start with the public and then go to the legislature.
Well, we're not a
an
referendum
idea.
style state, though. So, it pretty much has to go through us in order to get to the people with how everything's set up currently. And the thing is that with the decision that the Supreme Court made, it has implications completely that impact every factor of our life. It's not just abortion. Now it's death penalty cases. The Carr brothers and others have now filed for motions because now the way that the Constitution's been interpreted, it just changes everything. It's a blank slate, and it's pretty much like they decoupled our Constitution from the federal Constitution because their case law was bound basically in what federal judges had produced. And so anyway, needless to say, I think that it is a good opportunity for all of us to have the debate, put the idea in front of our constituencies, and let them decide.
No. Agree?
No, I don't. In fact, the Supreme Court of Kansas basically connected our Constitution to the federal Constitution with the right to privacy. And I kind of reject the idea of let the people vote. People do vote. Every 2 years they get to vote. In fact, we had an election a year ago, and one of the issues in that election was you had a very strong anti-choice candidate and a strong pro-choice candidate, and which side won. We have elections every 2 years. Maybe the next time it'll be a different outcome, but to say people don't get to vote in Kansas is we vote a lot every year, and they would decide what direction they want to go.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up with you, Neil.
Well, so one thing to note here is there's a lot of people think of Kansas as a monolithically socially conservative state, and that's not a fair characterization. We're a state where people talk and care a lot about these kinds of issues. And so, and you can't be certain how this debate's going to go, and also that both parties have lots of exposure on this, and we'll see.
No. Yeah, everybody kind of knows what the stances are, so we'll just have to wait and see if it makes it to the public and what the public votes on it. Well, thank you so much, Blake and Neil and Jim. I appreciate your conversation. It's been an interesting discussion. I hope you have enjoyed it as well. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, Cake News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. We'd love to hear your thoughts on it, on today's topics, or on future ideas for the shows. Just email us at kansasweek@kpts.org. For now, have a great week.